Welcome into the Illini Inquirer Podcast. Jeremy Werner, Joey Wagner, Ryan Easterling going to join us shortly, we think. But we have, Joey, 3 Illinois football commitments to talk about as Illinois has gotten off to a very, very quick start in the class of 2025. Over the weekend, Carson Boyd, 3 stars, St. Louis Cardinal Ritter, but he is from O'Fallon, Illinois, so he's an in-state kid. Commits to Illinois over several Power 4 options. Missouri was really in on him, a lot of other schools. And then today, we're recording this on Monday, Griffin Rousseau, big lineman out of Wisconsin, 6'7", 305 pounds, commits to Illinois. He had offers from Duke and Syracuse. Both those programs had coaching turnover during the offseason. But this is a rare, quick start in recruiting, in a recruiting cycle for Illinois. I went nerdy, Joey, if you would imagine. So January 29th, Illinois has 3 commitments. Just to put this in perspective, last year it took until May 4th, Trey Petty, for Illinois to get its 3rd commitment. 2 years ago, TJ McMillan, May 21st to get their 3rd commitment. 2022, Hunter Whitenack, April 16th. Now, that was the COVID year, but that was the 3rd commitment. Dating back to 2017, since I've really been doing this, Illinois averaged its 3rd commitment on April 30th. Illinois has 3 commitments on January 29th. Does that mean anything in the long term? We can get into that, but it's certainly a more encouraging start, more on line with the Big Ten peers. Illinois right in the middle, 7th, tied for 7th in the Big Ten with Michigan, one other program with 3 commitments so far.
Yeah, I think what you're seeing is years of relationship building coming to fruition, and Illinois had done a good job, obviously, with those guys. Oh, looking sharp, Ryan Easterling. But we've seen Griffin Rousseau on campus a handful of times. We've seen Michael McDonough on campus a handful of times. We know they've been recruiting Carson Boyd for a while. Like, that's when you have a coaching staff in place. There has been turnover, Jeremy. I'm sure we will get to that later on in this podcast, but when you have those relationships established for more than 4 or 5 months and you can get those guys down here a number of times, that helps get some of those early commitments, gets those guys to feel comfortable and ready to go. And you saw that play out over the weekend.
Yeah, Ryan, we've been talking about slow starts. How concerned should you be? I always wait until June, get through June, see where you are. But I think this certainly is a good thing. I don't think this is a bad thing. I don't think this is anything to scoff at, because most importantly, you have a couple recruiters now. I think that's the biggest thing. Carson Boyd can help recruit in the Metro East St. Louis area. Michael McDonough can help recruit in-state. Griffin Rousseau can help you sell other guys. And, other guys see what their peers are doing. So if Illinois has 1 commitment going into May, people are like, hey, is that program going in the right direction? But if you got guys buying into that are legit Power 4 prospects, that can only help. So what do you think?
Yeah, I mean, you've seen it in the past years where a lot of the guys haven't started jumping on board until that big visit push in the summer, especially after they started moving official visits up to the summer. And so, you make a really good point. I think one area where Illinois has had a lot of success in recent years is they've had recruits recruiting their peers. The staff has proven they can be good recruiters, but when you have the added firepower of getting guys on board early to champion the class and take ownership of it, I think it only helps your case. And 2, to that point, I think one of the reasons that they're doing a lot better now in terms of getting early success is they finally got kind of caught up. They spent years after staff transition where they were kind of behind the 8 ball in terms of trying to get caught up on classes and start to get ahead on other classes. And now I think you've seen where they were able to lay some groundwork in the previous cycle for 2025, and now they're starting to capitalize on that.
Yeah, Joey, and I usually would start with a quarterback because it's a really big deal to get a quarterback first, but 2 linemen, this is very on brand for Brett Bielema and Bart Miller to have 2 big physical linemen here. I saw Michael McDonough play Lincoln Way East, and that's a loaded Lincoln Way East team. But you can see the physicality, a guard, center prospect, picked Illinois over offers from Colorado, Purdue, some other Power 4 options, really good in-state get. And then to get Griffin Rousseau, who they were the first college to offer him. And then Mike Elko when he was at Duke, and Dino Babers when he was at Syracuse offered him as well, but 6'7", 305. I'll ask Ryan more for the breakdown of what he brings, but this is very on brand for Illinois to start on the offensive line. I think it tells a lot about their sell to get Michael McDonough to buy in. I also think Bart Miller's a pretty good recruiter.
Yeah, I think Bart Miller is a really good recruiter. Yeah, you're seeing a type, right? They get big linemen. I mean, it sounds stupid or elementary to say, but like they are recruiting huge individuals up front. And I think with Michael McDonough, like you mentioned, you get an interior prospect. He said he's comfortable on all five. That's high school. I think the three of us probably project him more at one of the two guard spots or possibly at center, which they seem kind of heavy at center. So one of the two guard spots would make sense. And Rousseau would be a guy who feels like you've got a lot of guys who could play right tackle. Jeremy, we were talking about this before we went live on YouTube. Feel pretty good about where they're at left tackle. Like that feels set to me. Left tackle of all the positions feels set when you go from a J.C. Davis into Brandon Henderson. And right tackle, maybe it's a little recency bias in our brains a little bit, but right tackle was an issue early on last season. They got that solidified, and you're still looking to see who could do that. We think they've got options, but Rousseau's another kid you would think could be in that conversation to play one of the guard spots or kick out to tackle. Tackles are hard to find too, right? I mean, there's not enough tackles, not enough defensive linemen, but to get him and maybe see if he's in a position to go out and play that spot, that's big for Illinois, because I do like what they've done, especially interior-wise, over the last couple of classes.
Yeah, Joe, and I want to mention that like the last two classes before this were really a step up in just recruiting wins. If you're just going by their offer sheets, it's a huge step up. Like Brandon Henderson didn't have a ton of offers, but we know what kind of prospect he is. But Brandon Hansen, Zafir Stewart, AJ Dennis, Eddie Turk, TJ McMillan, even Zach Amlin, like these guys had really good offer lists. So the depth they're building up there, which has been a concern ever since Brett Bielema got here, it's all got to develop. It's all got to play out, but they just have more talent, more depth of talent up front on the offensive line to where you think what happened early this year shouldn't happen again.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
Injuries always hurt, but you could see in the first couple of years under Bielema, they were an injury or two away from being in real trouble. And now it feels like they've got something pretty close to a legitimate bona fide two deep. And that is huge for depth. I mean, they made a point about being really concerned about getting as thin as they did at the end of last year. And you think about what would have happened 2 years ago if any of those guys got hurt. They were really blessed with good health a couple years ago. And they just can't have that happen where, one or two guys getting hurt just wrecks the O-line. And you saw what happened this year. One guy gets hurt, it displaces a bunch of guys because they're moving pieces around to try and get their best five out there, but it kind of disrupted the flow. Now, if you can get a true two deep out there that allows you to stay within yourself, stay within your scheme, and not have guys having to shuffle around too much, and they can just kind of play within themselves.
Yeah, what do you think of McDonough and Rousseau, Ryan? Like, how do you project them? What do they bring on the field?
Well, I really like McDonough as a guard. As Joey pointed out, they're pretty well set at center, especially if AJ Dennis ends up playing center. I mean, that's a real possibility. And they've got some other good pieces there, like Josh Kreutz has really stepped up. He's been good there. So I could see McDonough being probably a guard. One of the things that stood out to me a lot on his tape is he is extremely good at pulling into space and getting out there, getting to the second level. He's super mobile. Maybe not the big, massive O-lineman that some of the other guys in the class are, but he's super mobile. And once he adds a little bit more strength, and, Jeremy was quick to point out, he's a wrestler. You know how I feel about that. I will beat that drum until the day I go home. But, I think he's just real physical, gets out in space, and he's a guy that allows them to do some of that run and shoot type offense where they're getting stuff coming out of the backfield or throwing screens. As far as Rousseau, though, I mean, I like him at right tackle. I think they have a need there. It's really not a solidified position long-term. They've got some good options, but his frame is huge. He doesn't carry a lot of bad weight. He's a 4.0 student. He's got all the right pieces. Maybe doesn't have like the elite potential that some of the other guys have in the class, but he's just a rock solid guy that you can rely on out there. I mean, there's a reason they targeted him so diligently early on. And for a guy who goes to school maybe 20 minutes from Madison, Wisconsin, to not get a Wisconsin offer and to go to Illinois, I think maybe there'll be a little bit of a chip on his shoulder too.
Oh, there is. You can read that in my story.
Spoiler alert
about this. Him and Brandon Hansen, you feel like if one of those guys should work out at right tackle, right?
That's meat. That is meat.
That's huge dudes. And if one of them doesn't work out a tackle, you could slide into guard and just give you potentially more depth right there. So yes, they got the beef. There's no question of
those are two guys who love to put people on the turf.
Yeah, and that's Bart Miller's style, and this team definitely wants to run the ball, even though Barry Lunny has definitely brought more of a passing attack. Speaking of that, you got to be really encouraged about what Barry Lunny is building in that quarterback room, and I think Joey used the word continuity. And listen, I know everyone wants to fire their coordinator every year after that happens, but Illinois has not had continuity at the offensive coordinator position in a long time. Is Barry Lunny the first one to make it 3 years since Loxley? Like, it has been a long time. I guess we could count Cubit because he was head coach and offensive coordinator, but it's been a while. And really, since Cubit, there hasn't been a quarterback room probably that you felt good about. He had Lunt, Riley O'Toole, and Aaron Bailey at one point. I don't think he recruited any of those guys, but and now you have Luke Altmaier, Donovan Leary, Cal Swanson, Trey Petty, who just arrived, and Carson Boyd, a 3-star prospect from O'Fallon, Illinois, plays at Cardinal Ritter, led him to a state championship, split time with an older Division I quarterback who's going to Western Illinois, basically won the job over that guy, even though he was older and more experienced. 28 touchdowns to 1 interception. I talked to him this afternoon. He was pissed about that interception in the state playoffs. And 80% completion rate, great athlete. I like what Barry Lunny is bringing in this quarterback room, Joy, especially when you had Petty and Carson Boyd, two no doubt Power 4 prospects, two guys with dynamic ability, and two guys that talking with them, just really smart quarterbacks who have been coached well at the high school level, been playing this position for a long time. For those guys to come in behind Leary and Altmaier, I feel like they're building something there. I know attrition happens at this position, but to add these kind of pieces, this is as good as I felt about the quarterback room in probably about a decade for Illinois.
Yeah, and there's kind of a succession plan a little bit in place where you don't have these massive gaps of, well, this guy's the senior, and then, oh goodness, everyone else is a redshirt freshman. Like, you have a legitimate, you've seen quarterbacks. Now, attrition happens. I think we have to all acknowledge that, as you mentioned, with the quarterback spot, but there's a succession plan and there's talent. And to follow 2 classes where you go Petty and Boyd, that's a pretty good haul. And as you mentioned, I haven't talked to Boyd.
Champions, by the way.
Yeah, and Petty kind of definitely oozes that leadership. We had him on the signing day special, Jeremy. He was really, really impressive to talk to. I'm assuming Boyd has very, very similar qualities. I think we're also seeing, and Barry Lunny talked about it a little bit on the signing day special we had. It's not a prerequisite for them to have a dual threat guy, but they sure like guys who can move. And they like guys who can get out there and make plays. They don't have to be like we thought of Isaiah Williams coming into college. They don't have to be that. They have to be guys who can be efficient with their legs. And I think you see another, obviously, with that with Boyd.
I think it's a priority for them, to be honest with you, because if you do not have the stud wideouts that all these other teams, or the depth they have, or you have some issues up front, what can overcome that? It's an athletic quarterback that puts stress on a defense. So I think it's a huge priority for him. I think he'll say that he's not like, that's not the number one thing, because it's not. You got to be able to pass in his offense. You got to be able to read and do all those things. But Ryan, he's an explosive athlete. I watched the film, and there's Isaiah Williams things that he can do with his legs. I don't know how fast Isaiah is in the time. I'm interested to see if with the combine, but he's got long speed, but he's probably more accurate. He's probably got his better touch than Isaiah had as a quarterback at that time. Maybe Isaiah's a little bit better of an athlete, but I'm really excited about it. What do you see him on film from Carson Boyd?
Yeah, you don't get to 28 touchdowns to 1 interception by being a mediocre passer with mediocre accuracy and mediocre timing. As good as he is with his legs, I really like that he can move the pocket. But one thing that really stood out to me is when he was flushed out of the pocket or rolled out, he kept his eyes downfield. He wasn't just looking to tuck and run every single time that he felt some heat in the pocket. And so that allowed him to get his receivers open downfield a lot of times. And when he had an opportunity, he put it right on the money. His accuracy is great. I get similar vibes from him as I did from Trey Petty, in the sense that if he was a little bit bigger, maybe a little bit taller, he probably has a lot more offers. But being, 6 foot, 6'1", maybe not the biggest guy out there, maybe that held off some of the top programs, but like statistically speaking, his numbers are great. His tape is phenomenal. He can run when he needs to, but it's not necessarily his first option. And I mean, he puts it right on his receivers in stride. I really liked his tape. He's really accurate. That confidence obviously goes a long way as well towards helping. So 57 touchdowns to 4 interceptions in 2 seasons, hasn't lost a single high school game as a starter, 2 state championships. Doesn't get much better than that in terms of performance.
Yeah, and I got to tell you, just talking with the kid a couple times, like I'm really impressed with him. And he's already starting to recruit guys in that Metro East area that Illinois is going after. Now, guys, the question is, can Illinois keep up this seeming momentum? I mean, 3 guys in 10 days. Now, Carson told me he actually committed in December, didn't announce it until this week, of course. Griffin said he started to think about it last week. Michael McDonough obviously gets on board first publicly, but can they keep up this momentum? And Joey, they had a huge junior day, and they wanted Michael and Carson to help recruit these guys, and they got some of their top priorities on campus. So who are some of the guys after we've caught up with them, and we got plenty of updates on the site here the last couple of days? Who are some guys you're focused on, or how do you think they can continue this momentum?
Yeah, can I make one more quick point about the quarterback? They got their quarterback early.
Yeah.
Like that tells me they got a guy they targeted early and not having to kind of scour around a little bit. And I think that's a big deal for them to go out. And
to your point, Carson said they made me priority. Like some of these other schools are kind of like, yeah, we like you. Let's get you on campus later here. Illinois got him on campus in December by himself for his basically own junior day. And that was huge for him. They're like, you're our guy. We want you on board. Like, come be our quarterback. And he loved that because Missouri was Missouri can go after some pretty big targets here. They can go some big game hunting, but I think that's credit to Illinois and Barry Lunny for picking out his guy and getting one on board early. Last year, Danny O'Neill was kind of their guy early. They pivoted to Trey Petty, who I think is a great prospect. Earlier, Cal Swanson was kind of like we're in this late because Barry Lunny just got here. Who can we get in on in this class? So I think that's huge that they're getting their quarterback earlier because that is the one that gets going early. So, anyway, there's urgency to find those quarterback spots. Anyway, who do you think or what do you think is next for Illinois?
I mean, I think you got to look at someone like Braden Trimble, who's been on campus a number of times. He's from Mount Zion. You're looking less than an hour, less than 90 minutes from Champaign. He's got a lot of good competition. He's got offers. He's told me Nebraska is really pushing for him. He plans to visit Iowa. I mean, he's a talented wide receiver. He put up close to 1,000 receiving yards as a junior. But Illinois has done a good job. They got him early. They weren't his first Power 5. That truly does not seem to be something that really matters to him. I've not heard him mention anything like that. Northwestern was, and I don't know how thoroughly they're pushing for him at the moment or how thoroughly he's looking at them. So he's a guy. I don't know that he's in a hurry to commit. Yeah. He told me he'd like to do it after his football season. We'll see. Some of those plans get changed when you start jumping on OVs in the summer and start visiting campus. But he's a guy I would look at. I think there's a lot they like about him. They prioritized him seeing basketball practices and games and obviously making sure he got there for junior day. Jeremy, I know defensive lineman Cameron Brooks from Homewood Flossmoor would be a guy to look at. I think there's so much competition. Someone like Andre Levette, they've done a good job with him. I mean, he's another guy. Now that you start doing this and you see these same faces, it seems like for football games going back to that breakthrough season, right? Then you see him last year. And those just guys that you've seen their names a lot. And like those matter. Those long-standing relationships matter.
Guys who have been here several times over the past year, and as Ryan was talking about, like he's been here a while, like the staff has been here a while, they're caught up. Like they've gotten Levette on campus, I think, more than anybody so far, even though, Missouri, Purdue, Iowa, like that's a big time battle for a 3-star DB from Blue Island, Eisenhower, and the Chicagoland area. Cameron Brooks, Illinois got in early. He's been to campus 4 or 5 times now. You're competing with Kansas, and Kansas got a good sell. They have a couple of defensive linemen that might get drafted. Obviously, beat you last year and have a top 25 program coming back, and Leipold's building that thing. Those are probably the 3 guys I'm looking at most here. And Ryan, obviously, you got to keep swinging for some of these big targets. And Nate Marshall, top 50 prospect, was on campus. Illinois lost out on Caden O'Rourke who follows his brother footstep, Devin to Northwestern. And, Notre Dame has 3 of the top 12 prospects in the state. Michigan is recruiting this state incredibly hard. And then you have Miami and Alabama, all these big time programs coming in for these big time prospects. It has been a struggle to keep some of these top targets here, but when you go 5-7 and you're competing against some of these really proven powerhouses, it's hard to get some of those guys. But Illinois is in way more battles for these, power 4 prospects. I don't want to call them second tier prospects, but guys Illinois was struggling to really get the last couple of years of the Lovie Smith era.
Yeah, I mean, some of that is just the general talent of the roster has increased, and that level just breeds more competition. But some of the guys they're getting have connections to either younger teammates from high school. They're building better relationships with a lot of the coaches in the state. I mean, there's still feedback coming out now that schools are getting visits from this staff and from Coach Bielema that haven't seen Illinois coaches in their halls in a long time. And while it may not be yielding fruit yet, those are the things you have to do. We talked about this in the past, and a lot of people, might boo-boo this because, they're not getting the results. It's just lip service. It's like, well, those are still things you need to do to show that you're invested in recruiting those players, even if it doesn't yield immediate results, because a year or two down the road, that coach is going to remember, hey, you've really been trying here, and it keeps those doors open. The first 2 years that Bielema was back in Illinois, a lot of the effort was just getting back into those doors. Yep. It was places that they had gotten shut out of, whether it was just because former staffs hadn't talked to those schools or because Illinois had maybe done something that was like off-putting, but they have found their way back into these conversations, and, they're leveraging the right relationships. They're building a roster that makes a lot more sense. It's more balanced. They're increasing depth. And I mean, I think you would ask any of the staff, they tell you this last year was a disappointment in terms of the product on the field compared to what they were expecting. But I think you can still safely say that, at least in terms of the overall talent and composition of the roster, that it still took a step forward.
Yeah, Joe, it's going to be hard for Illinois to land. I always say Epinesa out of Edwardsville, 5-star prospect. Nate Marshall out of Fenwick. Deer Hill out of Althoff. Chris Burgess committed to Notre Dame, and they did everything right in that recruitment, but it's Notre Dame. Gabe Kaminsky out of Nazareth. These are top 10 prospects. Jason Dowell has the SEC coming out of Althoff Catholic, a defensive lineman. It's going to be hard to get those guys, but those guys do show up to campus. Those guys are open-minded to Illinois. Illinois was in to see Epinesa, and his dad's tweeting about Brett Bielema stopping by. Jason Dowell's tweeting about it. Nate Marshall shows up to an Illinois Junior Day. Listen, I know that's not a win. Maybe it can be in 2 or 3 years in the portal or whatever it is. And maybe that's not enough for Illini fans right now, but just based on what we've seen, what Ryan and I have seen, you have seen, that is a step forward. And when they're also winning the Eddie Turks, Tyshawn Griffins, Caden Fagan, Malik Elzy, they are starting to win more of those. It's just still hard for Illinois to beat Notre Dame and Alabama and Michigan and all those schools.
Yeah, I mean, look, Illinois, think about what Illinois football has been for most of these kids' lives. That's just the reality, and it's hard to win some of those when you're going up against that. And people don't want to hear that. I understand that, and people don't
just win, baby.
Right, and people don't see a and now you got to have good prospects to win, but you got to win to get good. You're kind of stuck
Chicken
there.
The egg.
Yeah, and you've got to figure your way through it. And I get it. People hear this and think, okay, he was on campus. That doesn't mean much, and it might not. It might not lead to a recruitment for these guys, right? That's just the reality of it. Maybe you get them on the second time around if they portal and play. A lot of players portal, right? So I understand. I understand the frustration when you see this and you see this is a really good 25 class in the state of Illinois. It is really, really good. There's a lot of talent. I thought 24 had a lot of really good top-end talent. And you saw that play out with big-time programs coming into the state, flying into Chicago, and making moves and getting these kids. So
helicoptering into their football fields.
Yeah, I mean, that's an impression. And
offering great NIL, too. Right, we can't
ignore that. Yeah.
Miami coming in here and stealing 2 of the top prospects, not only from Illinois but from Ohio State, Like they are Miami coming in here and stealing prospects from Ohio State. Like Illinois can't compete with that right now.
No, and that's the thing. So just to get these guys back on campus and put your best foot forward. Look, I mean, they're going into year 4 now. We've seen staffs around this time of their tenure focus their attention elsewhere in the state of Illinois, right? When it doesn't bear fruit, you go look into Florida, to Texas's, you go look around a little bit more, because the reality is you got to win. And if you're not getting that in the state, then someone's got to come in and you got to repair these relationships, and the cycle goes on and on and on. But Brett Bielema and his coaching staff are staying true to it. They're staying true to going on the road, getting in all of these high schools, putting their face forward, trying whatever they can to get these guys. We'll see if it plays out. I mean, I think obviously there's talent. There's still talent for guys who are in the mix for, but you got to get them. You got to get them, and getting 3 guys who I would imagine all 3 of these guys, or 2 of the 3, are going to be on that first or second OV weekend in June with some of the other big names. We'll see how it plays out then.
Yeah, right. I think Joey hit it right here. You keep doing it. You keep recruiting the state, and they keep getting players. Like they keep winning Power 4 battles. But yeah, keep doing it. And then you got to win on the field. You got to go elsewhere. And Illinois has gone elsewhere in the Midwest, especially, and in Florida, and gotten some talent. So I think you just keep doing what you're doing. Keep swinging the rock.
Keeping on.
Yeah.
Yeah. So it's interesting. So I previously read a book and I was revisiting it called Good to Great. And one of the things in there that honestly I was just listening to on the flight in here to Kansas City was this thing called the hedgehog concept. And it's basically this tenet or this belief or this kind of mantra that a lot of companies have, or like these top executives have, where even when it doesn't look like it's the right thing to do, you stick with what you truly believe in, and with like unwavering commitment. And that's really a lot. Yeah. I mean, yeah, they're biting kneecaps, and now they were one step short of the Super Bowl. But, it's one of those things where if Bielema believes in it, and it was something that when he came here, he stated as being something important. And I think he's proving now that it wasn't just lip service. Yep. It's something that he really believes in, is committed to, and knew that he might not see results from it right away. And so when it really breaks through, some of these companies that had those things that they did, or these paths they took, whether it was these crazy sales or whatever of certain business lines, and did things that didn't make sense, eventually they broke through. And when they broke through, it was in a big way. And so, it might seem like baby steps right now with some of the gains and the improvements they've made. But, over time, if they really break through and stick to it, I think it could be something that really works out well for them in the end if they stick to their plan.
Yeah, and Joey, that's kind of a good way to describe the Bielema era, despite 2022 was more than baby step. But you look at it as a whole, it might look like baby steps from the outside, but it's still progress. Like the competitiveness, the better recruiting process, the development. Like I feel like this roster is deeper. It's a deeper, more well-rounded roster. I think the coaching hires have been better. We'll get into George McDonald here. I still feel like there's been progress. And I think the start of this recruiting class is another sign. Like there's progress. It's just incremental. It's not, oh my gosh, we hire a guy, here's all the 4 and 5 stars. It was never going to be that with Brett Bielema. Like this is a developmental program. And now we got to see how he develops all these recruits we've talked about, and whether it is enough talent compared to the rest of the Big Ten.
Yeah. And look, you've seen hires across the country where they come in one year and it's a magic wand is waved and they have a couple winning seasons. And like Illinois had that 22 season, and last season was a disappointment. It was a step back from what we thought they were going to be. It wasn't a bottom out. And like, it's not even the bar, right? Like, I don't even want to say that to make it sound like, oh, well, at least it didn't crash and burn in a year. Like, 'cause that's not what this program is trending towards being, or how it should be compared. But yeah, I think you looked, there's a lot of disappointment and a lot of key positions. There are a few key positions last year. But you're right. There's more depth. We talked about it with the offensive line. There's like a legitimate 2 deep where you're not moving. Like the depth chart we did a month ago, guys, it wasn't the same name as the backup for all 5 positions like you've had to do before, because there aren't people who can play, ready to play guys. So you're seeing depth start to emerge. But yeah, now it's on, okay, you're primarily, with very few holdovers, you're primarily your classes. Like it is. I'd have to look at the percentage of the roster. It'll help when we get the official spring roster, but I think we know it well enough. I would imagine there's I'm just ballparking, 10 or 15%, probably less than that, 8 to 10% of Lovey guys left on this roster.
Yeah, and most of them didn't play for Lovey, right?
Right. That's right. So now it's okay. These are your guys you recruited. Still haven't had a lot of time with some of those better classes. Let's just call it what it is. You haven't had a lot of time more with the 23, and then obviously the 24 class just got there this month.
Yep.
But you need to have some of those guys ready to step into bigger roles. Your Ashton Hollandses of the world, your Malik Elzies of the world, as we continue to long-standing tease this George McDonald conversation. Like those guys, Caden Fagans, right? Aiden Lawford. Those guys need to be ready to step into a bigger role because they're needed and they've had time on campus. So I think now it's the development portion. Obviously, we'll still cover the heck out of recruiting because recruiting's getting, I guess, better. Or, it's been fine. But now you got to see these guys develop and get out on the field.
Yeah, so let's speak about George McDonald reportedly heading to Ole Miss. Nothing official from Ole Miss, nothing official from Illinois quite yet, but he was not, from what we saw at the basketball game for the Junior Day event, he was not in home for Carlos Orr's in-home visit from a lot of the Illini staff, which included Brett Bielema, Barry Lunny, Thad Ward, who has wide receivers coach experience. This is a loss. I mean, George McDonald's a very good coach. We saw what he developed with not only Isaiah Williams, but Casey Washington now having a shot to potentially get to the NFL. Pat Bryant is an NFL prospect. That was a really good trio of receivers last year, and he's recruited extremely well. So if he does move on, that's a loss. I can't blame him going to coach for a top 12 program that's going to have college football playoff potential, for a coach who's an offensive coach. There's going to be plenty of opportunity for George McDonald to potentially rise and become a play caller potentially, or, really help his resume to become a head coach at some point. But Ryan, what do you think the impact of losing George McDonald would be?
Well, it's tough. He really, really elevated that wide receiver room compared to when he took it over. Long-term impact, a lot of that's going to depend on who replaces him. If they are able to find somebody who is both a good coach and can keep this receiver room together and keep steering the ship and moving it forward, then, maybe the loss isn't that bad. But it always stings when you lose one of your own too, because, George McDonald is an Illinois alum. He was one of the originals on Bielema's staff, and now Bielema has to replace a position on this staff that he hasn't had to yet. McDonald stuck around with Lunny coming in. I guess same could be said too about Bart Miller, but it's tough because you see what he's done with this room. You see some of the guys that he's produced. You see some of the production that's increased from the wide receiver group. And now you've got to either replace him with somebody that can keep that up, or you potentially look at taking a step back, and you hope that the second is not what ends up happening. So really, really key hire here. I don't want to judge it necessarily just yet until we see who ends up taking over for him, but it is a big loss. And we'll just kind of see what Bielema does about it.
Can I add, you're going to Ole Miss, as you mentioned, Jeremy, college football playoff. You're going there. I don't know the timeline. I'm sure Barry Lunny has head coaching aspirations. I'm sure everyone who's a coordinator eventually wants to be a coach. If you get into this, right, you want to be the biggest voice in the room. I don't know what the timeline is for those. So maybe his timeline to get that step up doesn't align with George McDonald's timeline to want to jump into that coordinator play caller spot, if that makes sense. So, yes, you don't want to lose an alum, or as Ryan mentioned, the first guy that you have on staff, but kind of stuck there, right? Okay, Barry's done a good job. He's helped really elevate this offense. When is he going to make that leap to a head coach? And maybe George wants to be a little more fast-tracked.
George is 47 years old.
Yeah, maybe he wants to be fast-tracked in his jump to a coordinator spot. Not to say you can't get a coordinator spot from Illinois' wide receiver coach, and I think he was the associate head coach, Jeremy. But look, you go to a college football playoff team, you're probably going to have a few more options going to the SEC. So it's a tough loss. Ryan nailed it. Go ahead. Yeah, sorry, go ahead.
This is a big hire because George did a great job of turning the talent in that room. That is a talented room. It's young. It's very young. And the development of LZ, Hollins, Tyshawn Griffin, Colin Dixon, Hank Beatty, it is going to be very important. And Pat Bryant, who's got a chance to be an NFL player. So Barry Lunny, I thought the passing attack was really encouraging last year. I like what he does in that passing attack, and now they have to take it to the next level. without a guy who's been really important part of that. So there's a lot of pressure. I mean, we saw last year, like when you got to replace some guys you didn't want to lose, it's not always easy to find a replacement who elevates the next group or can continue to do that. So Ryan, there's a lot of pressure on Brett. He's got to replace Andy Boo still. He's got to replace George McDonald. So obviously Andy Boo was his decision. George McDonald was not.
Yeah. I mean, it's always easier when you know what's coming. And we don't have insight into that room really to the degree of knowing whether this caught Bielema off guard or if this was something they had talked about. Bielema has always seemed like somebody who wants to support his guys going into bigger and better roles. I'm sure he was wishing that would be on his own staff. But I think he probably is prepared for these situations. He at least would know that this could happen someday. Most good coaches, just like most good ADs, keep that short list of candidates that they want to reach out to when something like this happens. And so, with the timing, it's a little bit unfortunate. At least it didn't happen before signing day, which is always a good thing. A lot of these coaches do hang on through signing day, but it's really important, especially now, just to not lose any of that momentum they've got going, to get the right guy in place and also get the right guy in place before they start spring football. We're 2-3 weeks maybe away from the start of spring conditioning or like heavy spring conditioning. And then when early March rolls around, they're probably getting ready for spring football. So it's really important to get somebody in there that gets up to speed on the terminology, can provide some consistency, and try and pick up where McDonald left off without completely reinventing things.
This is a little bit more turnover, Joey, than I expected after the end of the season with Boo and Finellis. I thought one of those assistants on defense could potentially be changed, but now you got to replace a wide receiver. And, man, this coaching carousel continues as you have more, upheaval across the country. I did think it was a good thing that Michigan hired internally for their strength and conditioning coach, because Tank Wright was from that Ben Herbert tree. He's following Jim Harbaugh to the San Diego Chargers, their weight coach. So I think Tank Wright's a big part of this. Somebody, Brad, asked about the weight program. I think that's been a strength. I know they had some running back injuries, but it wasn't like consistent ACL injuries, right? Like there's going to be injuries in football, and Illinois had a little bit more last year probably than they hoped, but I think Tank Wright's been a really good part of that room. And strength coach, every coach will tell you, is probably one of the most important hires because they spend more time with the players than anybody.
Yeah, I don't get a chance to give you a hard time very often. So if Ben Herbert follows Jim Harbaugh to the San Diego Chargers, he might be looking around San Diego waiting for the Chargers to get there. I know. I just wanted to.
They should be in San Diego because no one gets
they should. I know. I don't get a chance to give you crap very often. I also want to point out with the timing of George McDonald. Look, portals are the portal, right? And it's going to open again after spring ball. You basically have 3 months, give or take, to build those relationships, keep those relationships with the current staffers you have in place, and also with the new wide receivers coach. And you got to make sure you're strong. And this is a good, I don't want to call it an audition, but it's not like these guys are jumping in the portal today or tomorrow. Like that's kind of some of those protections the portal windows give programs is they're here barring graduation. And I think the guys that George McDonald recruited are not in. I know the guys he recruited are not in that graduation discussion. So you got now through the end of spring ball to really fortify, solidify, continue those relationships with those guys.
And the other thing I do want to mention again is that Thad Ward has been a wide receivers coach before at both Kansas State and Temple. He was at Northern Illinois, Western Michigan. Like he spent more time as a wide receivers coach than a running backs coach. So you do have flexibility, and then he would have camaraderie with some of those guys in that wide receivers room if you have that. So it's just something I'm interested in. Does he go hire a running backs coach who usually is more of an up and comer? And one name I want to bring up here is Art Sikowski, because we keep hearing about him in recruiting, and he's a student assistant right now. Obviously, former Illini quarterback. I wonder I think Brett Bielema wants to keep him at some point. I think he's pretty green to be an assistant coach, but I think he's going to be a great coach someday. But I wonder if they can keep him in a recruiting role or whatever it is. But I do think he's got some flexibility, Bielema, to potentially go running backs coach here too.
Yeah, and I'm glad you brought that up, because I can imagine a scenario. We're in a press conference in a month, and Thad Ward is the running backs coach, and Brett Bielema said something along the lines of, I wondered how long George was going to be here, and Thad came back, and there was an opportunity to move him from one to the other. So I think that's very much a possibility, and it entirely possible something that Brett Bielema may have had on his radar for a year now or whatever it's been since he hired Thad Ward. I don't know that to be the case, but I wouldn't be surprised if you heard something if that's the route they go, if you heard something along those lines. So there's a little bit of flexibility there. Another name, I think Art, I like the Art idea. I've been, since I sat down with him in Tampa, I've been like, hey, this guy, like, you talk to people, you hear him, you know he's impressive. I think he would struggle in a recruiting role because I think he's got to be on the field. Like, I just think that's his, not that he couldn't do the job.
Personally.
Yeah, I think he would do fine in the job for what the job's asked for. I don't know that he could not be on a football field because he's a very vocal individual and a guy who really cherishes that part of coaching. So he's someone that you do wonder and I think Brett Bielema wants to keep him around because you can see that just in the way that they give him responsibilities. So, and he's been a guy on the road with some of the staff turnover. We've seen pictures of him out recruiting high schools. So I'm very interested to see which path they go, but you could see a running backs coach hired and a Thad Ward, I guess, promotion to a wide receiver coach. I think that's very much in the ballpark.
Yeah. And I wonder if Barry Lunny has more of a say in this hire. Like, he kind of inherited a staff. Does he get more of a say in this one? Will be interesting. Ryan, any final thoughts before we let you go? We know you got another meeting at some point.
Yeah, no, I mean, I think to Joey's point, having that flexibility really does increase your candidate pool. And so you're not stuck to just trying to hire a running back coach or just trying to hire a wide receivers coach. You can go out and get the best candidate at either position. And as long as Thad Ward's on board with being flexible, I mean, that gives you a little bit of flexibility. Now, again, I go back to what I was saying before. Ideally, you get that person in before spring ball. So I don't think they'll drag their feet too much on this. You know, maybe it's somebody, like you said, that Lunny's worked with in the past. One thing that when I was looking back through Bielema's former coaching connections, one of the positions where he's not really had a ton of turnover outside of, surrounding right around his coaching transitions was at receiver. Mm-hmm. There's some other spots where he's had a little more frequent coaching turnover on his assistant tree, but typically his receivers coaches have stuck around minimum 2, sometimes 3 or 4 years, which when you think about the landscape of assistant coaches is actually pretty stable. So, you would hope that he gets somebody that wants to be around for a while. He's had some coaches in his past that have kind of rode with him for several years, but he's had some where it's only been a year or two. So I think, the other thing too is McDonald was an associate head coach. And so there is that title now that's potentially available either for an internal promotion or gives you the latitude, like you guys just signaled for those of us who are not seeing this on video, the dollar bill, y'all. So, there's a chance that you have a little bit more purchase power with who you go after. You can be a little bit more aggressive, or kind of like his belief with NIL, reward the guys that got you there. And so there's a number of different ways they can go, but going back to what we were saying before, it's an important hire. It's one they got to get right. And while you want to be quick with it to get that gap filled, you got to get the right guy. And so I would expect him to do that as much as he can.
Ryan, you're the goods man. We'll let you go.
Thanks, guys.
All right. Appreciate you, man.
Ryan, just a couple other questions on our live YouTube here as we wrap up. Harry, how hot is Bart Miller's seat? O-line took a step back last year, especially with missed blocks. Great recruiter. Seems like we're getting an O-lineman every week, but the development piece is TBD. I think his seat is very cool. Joey?
I think it's a pretty cold seat. Look, I know the stat Harry's referring to, the chart that came out for most percentage of missed blocks. I'm not saying there's no value in that. Like, I'm not. We don't know the assignments, right? Like,
yeah, that's the hardest part of evaluating film is you don't know what the play was, you don't know what the assignment was. Like, you can see if a guy gets beat one-on-one, right? But even like in coverage, sometimes, like usually you can tell what the coverage is and what it should be, but you're not for sure. Listen, the offensive line struggled a lot in the first 6 games, and I think there's criticism to be had for rolling with right tackle Zy Chrysler, even though he did not practice at the position more than a week during the previous year, right? Like that, there's some criticism to go there. Probably should have gone to Isaiah Adams earlier, but I think they were just hoping they could keep Adams and Prohl together on the left side and that Chrysler could make do on the right side. They give him some chip help, and it didn't work. And they had to make a change. I give him credit for making that change. Took a couple weeks for Adams to really settle in. But by the end of the year, the offensive line was solid. Wasn't great, wasn't good, but it was solid enough to help you. And the offense really wasn't the issue towards the end of the season. So I think Bart Miller is a good coach, just to come back to this. I think he's a really good coach. He's a great recruiter. Guys have gotten better under him. Doug Kramer had his best season with him. Vidarian Lowe had his best season with him. We've seen some guys get
Alex Palczewski, Alex Pilstrom.
Yeah, guys are getting in the NFL, and I think there's guys now. J.C. Davis believes in him when he could have gone elsewhere, and Kevin Wigginton believes him, could have gone elsewhere. So I think he's done a good job overall.
Yeah, look, also Isaiah Adams and Zy Crystal were good JUCO prospects. There were still JUCO prospects who came in and had all Big Ten type seasons. I understand. I would not dispute that the offensive line struggled early. They would not dispute the offensive line struggled early. They made fixes to correct that, which effectively admitting didn't work. I thought it was a personnel and an evaluation decision more than a development decision. I think the development has been fine, and we still, let's also be fair, we haven't seen that play out largely because the guys that they brought in, especially some of the more highly ranked guys, which had come in the last two classes, still need that development piece. So his seat is cold to me. Like I can't imagine much changing that. I think he's a good coach. He's recruiting well. It's just a rough first half of a year to me.
Yeah. Let's see. I can't even say this name of this person. J-Rob, how we're looking with some higher end talent, aka the AJ Dennis's or Malik Elsie's. Looking at the composites, here's some top targets that are 4 stars. Joey, Nate Marshall. It's gonna be really hard to get him over the Alabamas, Michigans, Miamis of the world. Ios Epinesa, at least they're starting to get a little in there. Seems like maybe they're getting consideration, but with his Iowa ties.
Yeah, don't Bielema and his dad have a history? Don't they know each other? I'm not trying to.
Was dad played at Iowa when Bielema was a GA?
Yeah, I'm not trying to paint a wrong picture.
They know each other very well. Yeah.
Yeah, but look, obviously the Iowa ties are very, very strong with him, but they're putting their foot in that conversation and seeing what kind of traction they can get. I don't know if it's going to pay off, but they're certainly giving it a whirl.
I think it would have to take an Iowa coaching change for that to happen, right? Like,
yeah. I don't. Here's the thing. I think I've talked to Iose once. He was on campus for a game, maybe the season opener the 22 season, if I'm not mistaken. I could be wrong there. So I don't want to pretend like I know the kid any better than you or J-Rob does. But the Iowa ties are strong because there's a history and a lineage there.
The 2 Althoff kids, Dier Hill and Jason Dowell, Illinois is in on, but again, you're battling SEC Big Ten programs. Gabe Kaminsky, in-state kid, from what I was told this last weekend was his first visit in a couple of years. So they got him back on campus. Charlie Bolin, I'm not going to doubt on the recruiting trail. He's been really, really good. And they're going to keep swinging for Chris Burgess, the 4-star Simeon Edge, who offered first, got on campus a bunch of times, but then, the big dogs come in and Notre Dame's able to get a commitment from him. So they'll keep swinging on him. But no, I don't think I'm not sitting there going, they're a favorite for any 4-star right now.
No, I don't. I'm not going to pretend like they are or lie about that to anyone to make them feel good. But the 3 stars they're getting are like they're winning Power 5 battles. And again, no one wants that kind of moral victory or however they view it. They want 4 stars. They want 5 stars. I understand that.
I think Carson Boyd's a very, very good guy.
Carson Boyd's good. I mean, again,
my ranking scale, he's a 4-star, like a lower 4-star.
Right. You go back and even in the 24 class, like they got guys who are fringe 4-star guys and 4-star guys by some other outlets and right there in the composite. So I get it. Like I get it. I get how recruiting is. Can we mention, since we brought up Chris Burgess, and not to draw a direct line, but to circle back to the coaching staff a little bit, Dre Brown.
Ooh, that's a
name. Might be someone. That's not that we've heard anything, but he's a guy who's done a good job in the recruiting department at Notre Dame. Some guys like that path too, like Nate McNeil, Pat Embleton. Nate McNeil now at Syracuse. They like that recruiting lane. Like Pat Embleton will tell you, he's told us in one of our medias with him that he came into this thing wanting to be an on-field coach and found. So maybe that's what Dre likes, but he's also a guy who's played at Illinois, obviously played running back at Illinois, has cut his teeth a little bit in this college football world. I don't know if he'd be interested. I don't know if Brett would be interested. But since we brought up Notre Dame, it made my mind jump back there.
It's the Halasek hire of the offensive staff, if they want. Brian, how are we looking on D-line, edge prospects? They seem to be positions we've been finding some gems lately. Yeah, I think Cameron Brooks, defensive lineman out of Homewood Flossmoor, is one that, Terrence Jameson has had a pretty good year in recruiting. I think he's doing really, really well with him. Edge, Gabe Kaminsky out of Nazareth Academy. They lost out on Caden O'Rourke, of course. But he's also been pushing for Landon Brooks out of Muncie, Indiana, 3-star kid's got offers from Indiana, Michigan State, and could get some more offers, but they got him here for the junior day visit. So I think they've been recruiting those positions pretty well, defensive line and edge, especially the last few recruiting classes. And I think they'll land some talent. There's a lot of talent in the state, though, at those positions, and that's where you want to take advantage and land a couple of them, Joey.
Yeah, and it feels like let's be honest, the defensive line recruiting has gotten a lot better over the last 18 or so months. They missed on some guys early on in this coaching staff's tenure, but it also, you have to factor in that there's some really good defensive linemen in the state of Illinois, and in the last couple of cycles, those linemen, save for Eddie Turk, have gone elsewhere to some big programs. It's not, I don't know if that makes you feel better that you're not losing them to I guess like a program that you feel like you're on the same plane with, a Purdue, or Indiana, Minnesota. You're losing them to the Michigans, the Notre Dames, the Miamis, go down the list. It's still losing them, and that's kind of the end of the story there. But, man, they've had some really high-end – the state of Illinois has had some high-end defensive linemen.
All right, last one. Happy Hermit. Maybe high school players are pulling the trigger sooner due to the transfer portal. They want to reserve a spot before it gets filled through that. I can tell you that's why we don't see a lot in January and February anymore. I don't know about this early, because if they make their commitment by June, they should be good. Quarterbacks certainly make their decisions early, but offensive linemen like Michael McDonough or Griffin Rousseau could have stretched us out a little bit. Like maybe Illinois would have been at some point like, hey, Griffin, we're going to go after some more guys if you don't want to jump on soon. But I think it's mostly you don't see as much in January and February now, because those scholarships are just going to transfers to help you immediately.
Yeah, I think some of these guys are like Brandon Hansen could have taken his recruitment. Yeah. Well, I mean, God, he could have taken it into January, and he didn't, right? So I think a lot of this for the guys, and I don't think you're going to see a big, like 3 feels like a lot of commitments before February 1st to me. Like, I don't know that you're going to see that really steer into the 5s and 6s moving forward. But quarterback getting one early is fine. I think it's just really strong relationships playing out, and you don't need to see anymore. You don't need to see anymore, right? And just go on and kind of be the leader of that class.
All right, Joey Wagner, thank you, buddy.
Thanks, man. Appreciate it.
Yeah, so I talked with Isaac Trotter earlier today. That's going to be after this. If you're listening on the podcast, we'll have that up for you on YouTube as well after this. But Illinois starting off well in the class of 2025. Thanks to all our live YouTube listeners. Hit the like button on the way out. Hit the notifications bell. Subscribe to us. And please rate us, review us wherever you get your podcasts as well. Everybody have a great day. Take care of each other. We'll talk to you next time right here on the Illini Inquirer Podcast.